I used to keep a notebook under my mattress where I wrote down every embarrassing thing I did. Not dramatic stuff, just stupid little things. Times I said something awkward, people I should have apologized to, mistakes I couldn't stop replaying at 3 in the morning. I guess I thought if I wrote everything down I could control it. That habit came back to me years later when I started working as a police records clerk. My job wasn't exciting, mostly paperwork, old case files, evidence logs, and reports nobody wanted to read twice. But I liked it. There was something comforting about knowing that every incident had a number, every piece of evidence had a location, and every name belonged to a file. Then I noticed something strange. 3 unsolved murder files had the same handwritten mark in the corner, just a tiny black triangle. At first I assumed it was some filing system I didn't know about. The first file belonged to a woman named Diane Mercer, found dead in her apartment 8 years earlier. The second was a college student named Ryan Cole, whose case had gone cold 5 years ago. The third was a retired teacher named Martin Bell. Different victims, different neighborhoods, different years, but the same triangle. I asked my supervisor about it. He barely looked up from his coffee. Old notation, ignore it. So I did, for about 2 weeks. Then a new case came in, a missing person report. A woman named Elena Price, 34 years old, last seen leaving a grocery store at 9:17 p.m. Her car was found 3 blocks from her apartment. Nothing obviously suspicious. No broken windows, no abandoned belongings, no witnesses who remembered anything useful. Just another missing person file. Except when I opened it, there was a black triangle in the corner. I remember staring at it for a long time, and this is where I made my first mistake. I took the file home. I know, I wasn't supposed to. I told myself I was only going to look at it for an hour. Instead, I stayed awake until almost 4 in the morning, spreading photographs and reports across my kitchen table. That's when I noticed something I'd missed at work. Elena's last phone call had been made at 9:04 p.m. The number belonged to a disconnected landline. I searched the number through our internal system. Nothing. Then I searched the address associated with it, an abandoned house on Willow Street. The weird thing was, Willow Street had appeared in 2 of the old murder investigations. Diane Mercer had worked at a pharmacy 3 blocks away. Martin Bell had taught at a school nearby, and Ryan Cole, his phone had connected to a tower covering Willow Street on the night he disappeared. That was the moment I stopped thinking about coincidence. I went back to work the next morning and started pulling every case involving Willow Street. There were 11. Most were completely unrelated, but 4 involved people who had disappeared or died under circumstances that never quite made sense. And every one of those 4 files had the same triangle. I should have gone straight to my supervisor. Instead, I started investigating on my own. I told myself I was helping. Really, I wanted to be the person who solved something everyone else had missed. That's the part I don't like admitting, because once you start believing you're smarter than everyone around you, you stop noticing how easily you can become reckless. I found a name appearing in 3 separate files. Daniel Voss. He wasn't a suspect. He wasn't even a witness. His name appeared in completely ordinary places. A maintenance contractor, a former property manager, a man who had once reported a broken streetlight. Nothing connected him to the murders, except that he had lived less than half a mile from Willow Street for almost 20 years. I searched his address, current residence, no result. Former residence. There it was, a small apartment building on the same street where Elena's car had been found. I stared at the screen. Then my phone rang. It was my supervisor. He asked where I was. I said I was at home. He went silent. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Don't go near Willow Street. I asked him why. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked me whether I'd opened Elena Price's file outside the office. I didn't say anything. He already knew. Then he said, very quietly, you need to bring that file back. I asked him how he knew I had it. Another silence. Then he said, because someone has been asking about you. I hung up. For several minutes I just sat there. Then I looked toward the kitchen table. The file was still there, but something had changed. I was certain I had left Elena's photograph face up. Now it was turned over, and underneath it was a small piece of paper. No envelope, no handwriting I recognized, just 4 words. You missed the first one. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was convinced someone was watching my apartment, because I couldn't stop thinking about those 4 words. You missed the first one. I kept asking myself what they meant. The first murder, the first victim, or the first mistake. By 6 in the morning, I'd convinced myself there was only one way to find out. I went back to the records office. My supervisor wasn't there. His desk was empty, his coffee still sitting beside the computer. I called him, straight to voicemail. Then I noticed something sitting on my chair, a photograph. It showed showed Willow Street from across the road, taken at night. In the corner of the photograph was a car, my car. I recognized the license plate immediately. Someone had been watching me. I should have called the police. The irony isn't lost on me. I worked in a police department, and yet I was standing there trying to solve my own case like an idiot. Instead, I opened the old files again. I started with the earliest triangle, Diane Mercer, 8 years earlier. Then I found something nobody had mentioned in the original report. Diane had written a complaint 3 days before her death. It wasn't about a stalker. It wasn't about threats. It was about a strange man repeatedly appearing outside the pharmacy. She described him as polite. That detail bothered me. She hadn't written that he looked dangerous. She wrote that he was too polite. Then I found the same phrase in another witness statement. Ryan Cole's roommate had described someone he'd seen near Ryan's apartment. Very polite. Martin Bell's neighbor had said almost the exact same thing. At that point, I knew Daniel Voss wasn't just some random name. I searched his employment history. There were gaps, huge ones. 5 years here, 3 years there. Jobs that ended suddenly. Addresses that overlapped with the locations of unsolved cases. And then I found something that made everything worse. Daniel Voss wasn't his real name. His birth name was Thomas Vale. I searched that name. One result appeared. A missing child report from 26 years earlier. The child was 11 years old. His name was Thomas Vale. Reported missing after leaving school. Never found. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then my supervisor finally called me back. I answered immediately. He didn't say hello. He asked me where I was. I told him. He said, "Leave the building." I asked why. He said, "Because I should have told you this years ago." I waited. He told me the original investigator on the Diane Mercer case had suspected a connection between the murders. He had discovered the triangle. He had also discovered Thomas Vale. And then, 2 days later, he disappeared. Officially, he resigned. Unofficially, nobody ever heard from him again. I asked my supervisor why the case had never been reopened. He said the evidence wasn't strong enough. Then he said something I still remember. We weren't looking for a killer anymore. We were looking for someone who knew how to erase himself. I left the office. I drove straight to Willow Street. I know that sounds insane. It was. The abandoned house was smaller than I'd imagined. Old brick, boarded windows, a dead garden covered in weeds. I walked around the back. There was a basement door, unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like damp wood and old paper. My flashlight shook in my hand. The basement was almost empty, except for a metal filing cabinet. It was locked. I found a key taped beneath the bottom drawer. Inside were folders, dozens of them. Names, dates, photographs, not just murder victims. People who had reported suspicious strangers. People who had complained about someone following them. People who had simply noticed something they shouldn't have. And then I found my own folder. My name was written across the front. Inside was a photograph of me entering the police station. Another of me buying coffee. Another of me sitting in my car. The newest photograph had been taken that morning. I was standing in the records office, looking directly at the camera. I dropped the folder. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, calm. Someone walking across the wooden floor. I switched off my flashlight. I didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped above me. Then a voice came through the basement door. "You're very curious." I knew that voice. I'd heard it before. Not in person. On recordings. Daniel Voss. Thomas Vale. Whatever his real name was. He stepped into the basement. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could see the outline of his shoulders. He looked at the filing cabinet, then at my folder on the floor, and he said something that completely changed the case. I didn't kill them. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because somehow that was worse. He told me the triangle wasn't his signature. It was a warning. The original investigator had created it after discovering a group of people who had been manipulating investigations from inside the system. Some murders had been committed by one person. Others had been staged to look connected. Some victims had been chosen because they knew too much. And Thomas, he had been tracking them for years. Then he looked directly at me. "You think you're investigating a serial killer?" He paused. "You're investigating the people who made everyone believe there was only one." Behind him, something moved upstairs. Another set of footsteps. Thomas looked toward the ceiling. For the first time, he looked frightened. Then he whispered, "They found me." The basement door slammed open. I ran. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember opening the back door. I only remember reaching my car and driving until Willow Street disappeared behind me. Thomas was gone. The files were gone. My folder was gone. And when I finally returned to the police station, my supervisor supervisor was waiting. He looked exhausted. He told me Thomas Vale had been dead for 6 years. I didn't believe him. Then he placed a photograph on the desk. Thomas Vale, a morgue photograph from 6 years earlier. Same face, same scar above his eyebrow, same man I'd just seen in the basement. I asked him how that was possible. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a drawer and handed me one final file. It contained only a single photograph. Elena Price, alive, standing beside Thomas Vale. The photograph was dated 3 years before she disappeared. On the back, someone had written, "She was never a victim." I stared at those words for what felt like an hour. Then my supervisor said something that made me understand why he'd been so afraid. "You're looking at this the wrong way." I looked up. He said, "Elena wasn't the latest victim. She's the person who started choosing them." And suddenly every strange detail made sense. The disconnected phone, the black triangles, the missing files, the people who vanished after noticing something, the photographs of me. They weren't watching me because I was getting close to a killer. They were watching me because I had found the wrong truth. I quit the next morning. I moved apartments, changed my phone number, stopped talking about the case. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then, one evening, I found a package outside my door. No return address. Inside was my old notebook, the one I'd kept under my mattress when I was younger. I hadn't seen it in years. Every page was filled with my handwriting, except the final page. There was one sentence written there. I know this makes me sound paranoid. Maybe I am, but the handwriting wasn't mine. It said, "You were right about the first one." And underneath it was that same little black triangle. I still don't know who put it there. I still don't know whether Thomas Vale was a victim, a killer, or something in between. And I never found Elena Price. But sometimes I wonder if that's the point. Maybe the scariest thing about people like that isn't that they hide in darkness. It's that they learn how to make you question what you saw in the light. And if you're listening to this because you think you've noticed something strange in your own life, be careful about who you tell, because sometimes the person helping you investigate the monster already knows where you're going to look.